Hello there friends and welcome. For today's Warhammer 40K Rogue Trader Guide we have at long last an update for IDIRA, the Unsanctioned Psyker. It might surprise you to know that IDIRA has the potential of becoming the strongest character in the game, stronger than even the main character themselves, by virtue of having the ability to acquire the highest Psi rating possible. No one else will get as close. We are talking about 50, 60, even higher than 100 plus Psi rating for not only extreme damage on your spells, but also absolutely busted buffing and debuffing potential, because most of your buffs will scale directly based on Psi rating. So you can not only make all of your ally stats God mode, talking about 1000 plus, 500 plus, but even their defenses as well. And with this build, your IDIRA will get loads and loads of extra turns right at the first true round of battle to constantly buff allies, debuff enemies, and of course, increase her Psi rating to enormous amounts. So without further ado, let us get into our IDIRA Psi Goddess build, the strongest Psyker and the highest Psi rating possible in the game. IDIRA starts as an operative, which is a class that can get very high damage bonuses by virtue of triggering exploits, also for debuffing the enemies even further besides her own Psyker stuff. And of course, I'll explain the operative abilities in the how to play section. Now, level 4 means your first heroic action, dismantling attack, which honestly, you'll never be using outside of the prologue boss. It's not really that good. For the first operative talent at level 4, however, what you want is the same for any operative build, to be fair. Uncanny Sight. This way, at the start of battle and every turn after, every single enemy, regardless if you don't have line of sight against them, will suffer one exploit, which of course means more damage and more debuffing potential. After that, increase IDIRA's willpower, which is your main way of increasing Psyker spell damage. Followed by our first Psyker exclusive talent. What you want is Second Sight. If you've watched my Psyker God Pyromancer Blaster build, then you know why we are picking this. It will increase the range of all of your psychic powers of all schools by a value equal to your perception modifier, which is high for IDIRA, as perception is also tied to extra damage when triggering exploits. Anyways, having high range on your spells is a godsend early because you can target enemies even behind cover with IDIRA, as to have her stay out of danger during battle. Then for the second operative talent at level 6, it is time for one of the ultimate extra damage sources in the game, Tide of Excellence. Whenever IDIRA triggers an exploit on an enemy, it just requires you to attack them basically and will work with area of effect spells. She'll get stacking flat bonuses to damage, which is the best part, but even extra armor penetration. Also great, it's just that as a telepath, spells like her Psychic Shriek and Psychic Assault already bypass the enemy's armor by virtue of dealing mental damage. But anyways, the extra damage is amazing for all spells. Well, speaking about damage, we want even more willpower at the next level. For the first power upgrade at level 7, just like my Cassia build, you don't really want more operative stuff, rather more psychic powers, starting with Sensory Deprivation, one of the best debuffs in the game. Mostly because it will work even if the enemy resists it, right? So if the enemy fails the saving throw, they'll not only be blinded, which is already a crippling debuff to their offensive skills, and also defenses with dodge and parry reductions, but suffer even higher debuffs based on your Psi rating. Meanwhile, even if they make the saving throw, they'll still be blinded. They'll just won't take more blinded debuffs. So it's great overall, and can be cast even in the same turn when you use an attacking offensive spell like Psychic Assault. After that, for skills, my preferred pick is Lore Warp. But this is going to depend on what other party members you have covering skills for you anyways. IDIRA, however, is still the best choice for the ship post that's based on Lore Warp, as I'll show in my updated ship combat guide, so it's a really good pick for her. But in case you have someone else in your party going for it, pick Awareness instead, also amazing to find all the secret items that are spread through all the game areas pretty much. After that, you don't really need more operative talents, because they're mostly just, percentage based increases to damage, which is nowhere near as good as flat damage sources. And for more operative debuffs, you have my Pascal build already. So once again, it's all about more Psyker power, especially because IDIRA has multiple Psyker schools even at level 1, Telepath and Divination. But what we want now is another generic talent, Psychic Barrage. While Second Sight will increase your range based on perception, Psychic Barrage increases Psychic spell power damage based on ballistic skill. And once again, the more flat sources of damage you have, the better, especially because it will stack with your Tide of Excellent operative talent. After that, for even more damage, we want Pain Channeling. This way, whenever IDIRA kills an enemy with a psychic power dealing more damage than the enemy has as hit points, the excess damage will change to a nearby target. Great because it has unlimited range pretty much. The enemies don't even need to be close to one another. You are basically one-shotting 2 enemies at once even with single target damage spells. For your Dismantling attack heroic action upgrade, it doesn't really matter because you'll never be using it, but you might as well pick the second one first for even more debuffing potential. After that, more Lore Warp or whatever you want. Once you max it, go for Awareness. And once you max Willpower, it's time for more Ballistic skill as it's all about extra damage for Psyker spells. Then at long last, you can pick Psyker Minoris as IDIRA is an unsanctioned Psyker. So it takes a little longer for her to get it nowadays than sanctioned Psykers, but well, she already starts with higher Psy rating by default. After you max Awareness, it can really be whatever, but ideally either Lore Xenos or Medicae, because Lore Imperium, Tech Use and Logic, you have someone like Pascal or Jai for that. Then we want another Psyker spell, this time a buff, Prescience. One of the best buffs in the game because it increases all mental stats for any ally, including IDIRA herself, which of course means more damage, more range, plus it scales on Psy rating and, well, IDIRA is the only one that can have 100 plus Psy rating. After that, since we are getting more buffs now, go for Fate Bringer. A pretty nice ally buff because it can increase the armor penetration of some of your best damage dealers, especially someone like Argenta, with ranged burst weapons. Also based on Psy rating, by the way. So eventually, by itself, this can already make one ally fully bypass the enemy's armor, even on unfair. After that, Power Conduit. After triggering Psychic Phenomena or Perils of the Warp, your next Psychic power will cost -1 less action points. Great because IDIRA will always be triggering this, as I'll explain in the How to Play section because she is an unsanctioned Psyker. Then more Ballistic skill, followed by more Perception, and, as the last operative talent, Warp Minds, one of the best ways of debuffing all enemies in battle. After every 6 use of a Psychic power, all enemies will instantly gain a -5 penalty to all stats, stacking until the end of combat. It might seem hard to trigger, but it's not, because very soon your IDIRA will be swimming in extra turns and have the ability to cast all of these powerful Psyker debuffs and buffs for 0 AP cost only. So this will add up quite nicely, even at turn 1 in battle. And then you might as well pick the first upgrade for Dismantling attack. Now, for IDIRA's second archetype, Bounty Hunter is without a doubt the best option. With it, you can mark a few enemies at the start of battle as prey, doesn't really cost anything. Then, when supported by the Save or the Kill talent that I'll explain better in the How to Play section, your IDIRA will constantly get 3 turns whenever an ally kills an enemy marked as prey. For IDIRA, this is amazing because through her special gear, she'll constantly get more and more and more Psy rating, while also debuffing enemies and buffing multiple party members at the same time, so it's a win-win-win. For the first Bounty Hunter power, it's the same logic as Operative. You don't care for the specific ones, what you want is even more Psyker powers. This time you want Foreboding. The effect itself is not that big early, but can actually increase the dodge of all nearby allies, including IDIRA herself, based on her Psy rating. Most importantly, this counts as a major psychic power, which means higher chances of triggering psychic phenomena, and that is how you will increase her Psy rating by a lot soon enough. through her special gloves. And for our one and only true bounty hunter talent, it's finally time for Savor the Kill, which is what will enable our looping, psi rating increasing, giga buff and debuffing combo. But once again, better explained in the how to play section. Then you'll get the bounty hunter's Wild Hunt heroic action. This does have one use, however, in that later, at level 27, it will allow IDIRA to mark more enemies as prey through the second upgrade, which of course means more extra turns and more buffing and debuffing and psi rating through Savor the Kill. But early on it doesn't really matter. Then a return to willpower increases at level 20, followed by more Psyker powers. Now it's time for Psyker Maioris for even higher psi rating, followed by more willpower and the Thriving in Peril talent. Every peril of the warp will actually increase party momentum based on IDIRA's psi rating. At this point, because of how many spells you can cast during your multiple extra turns, chances are you will eventually generate a Perils of the Warp, and the more party momentum, the better for more heroic actions. After that, you want yet another spell, and it's finally time for Psychic Assault, IDIRA's most powerful area of effect offensive psychic power. It basically deals the damage of your Psychic Shriek to all enemies in a huge cone at the front of IDIRA. Kinda the same as Cassie's Little Esther power, because it can even make enemies stunned if they fail the willpower test. After that, even more Psyker stuff. Well, this time you might as well go for characteristic training and willpower for more spell damage, followed by a return to Lore Warp and more ballistic skill for more damage. Then you can pick either characteristic training for more spell range or ballistic skill for more damage, which is what I prefer. And honestly, you don't really need more bounty hunter talents, because they're mostly about increasing either armor penetration or critical hits chance and damage, and well, unfortunately, your psychic spells cannot critical at all. So I just go for characteristic training and perception now, followed by more Lore Warp, and back to ballistic skill increases. Then the second upgrade to Wild Hunt, very precious, because it provides IDIRA with more Hunt Down the Prey charges to mark more enemies as prey, which of course means more extra turns through Savor the Kill. After that, well, you might as well pick the Inspiring Trophy, Bounty Hunter talent. Whenever IDIRA kills prey that's difficulty tier 4 or higher, so the toughest enemies, she'll get an extra +2 AP. It's not really that necessary, but well, we have the space for it now. Then more Awareness, followed by more Perception. Then at long last, Psyker Terminus for even higher psi rating. Now, for another Psyker power, you have two options. You can pick Perfect Timing, because just like Foreboding, it's also a major psychic power, which means higher chances of triggering psychic phenomena for higher psi rating. It's not really that necessary, however, because you already have Foreboding for that, and they are quite costly at 2 AP. For us, it will be 1 AP only. Something you can do, however, is already get started into another Psyker school for even more buffing potential, ideally Biomancy. That's even more buffs for all your allies during all of your extra turns. That will cost 0 AP, by the way. Since we have Biomancy now, we can pick a very nice buffing talent, Strange Vitality. Every ally affected by IDIRA's psychic buffs will also gain a stacking +5 toughness, very good, for higher HP and tanking potential, especially on Abelard. Then more Perception, followed by more Awareness. Well, by now we kinda already have the best Psyker talents, including the best generic ones for bonuses to all stats. You might as well pick It Will Not Die now, because you want to increase our hit points for a talent we'll be picking during Exemplar progression, which will be very important. Then you might as well go for Mind Thief. It has both a buffing and debuffing effect, but the effects are kinda minor, which is why I delay it for now. But you can pick it earlier if you want. After that, the upgrade for Wild Hunt can kinda be whatever. Might as well be the first one, because you don't really wanna kill the enemy you attack with this, so you have another ally kill it instead for more Savor the Kill extra turns. So don't pick the third one for more damage. Now it's time for Exemplar progression. The first talent is actually kind of funny because it's not about increasing IDIRA's damage or Psyker power, at least not directly, But what you want is peak condition. With this, IDIRA will gain a bonus to strength equal to 20% of her maximum wounds, also why we picked, it will not die earlier for higher HP. This is important because it will increase her strength to higher than 45, which is necessary for heavy armor proficiency. Something very good for her because the best Psyker armor to increase high rating by enormous amounts is heavy armor. And at this point in the game, Act 4, you can buy it just fine from one of the factions. Sadly, Bounty Hunter didn't really have ways of increasing your strength to level up, which is why we had to increase it through Peak Condition Exemplar. Now here's the thing, my IDIRA has the Blessing of Saint Cognatius for +5 strength. This comes from Colony Management, it's actually a +5 bonus to all stats, but in case you didn't get it and you want as high strength as early as possible, just pick a +5 to your strength during one of the levels you increase the stat through characteristic training. For example, in any of the levels here, here, and here, pick characteristic training strength instead, ideally instead of perception. After that, you can actually pick more operative talents, and since we already have the best Psyker ones anyways, you might as well do that, because essentially it's for free now. First with Combat Insight. Whenever IDIRA's perception bonus is 10 or higher, very easy at this point through her buffs, she'll get +1 AP and ignore enemies' deflection, mostly for the extra AP. Then more Lore Warp, and honestly at this point you might as well pick Stronger Together, which increases the willpower of all party members besides IDIRA herself by +5. It can help fellow officers, or Psykers, or Cassia. I mean, by virtue of helping Cassia alone, who is the toughest party member besides IDIRA at this point, it's nice to have, and of course you can pick it earlier if you want. It's just that it's gonna depend on how many characters that benefit from willpower you have in your party. Then more willpower. After that, for level 38, well, because we have enough strength at long last, you can finally pick heavy armor proficiency to fully benefit and exploit the highly OP Psyker breastplate for IDIRA. Then we want another Psyker power, this time Biomancy's Enfeeble, which can both highly debuff enemy stats and also increase the damage they take, all based on Psy rating, which at this point will be at full power for IDIRA, talking about 20, 30, 50, 100 plus, especially since we have access to the Psyker breastplate now. Then more Lore Warp, and after that we can finally pick a good Exemplar talent for more damage. There's multiple abilities for extra damage you can pick here, such as Cataclysm, which is percentage based, the always useful Extermination, flat damage based, but better for single target attacks and abilities, Combat Meditation for higher willpower, but my preferred pick is actually Malign Influence. Whenever an enemy fails a willpower test against IDIRA, they'll suffer direct damage based on her willpower bonus. This helps because remember, IDIRA has loads of extra turns during which she can always cast Sensory Deprivation, which is resistance test based, for free. So you'll not only be blinding enemies and highly debuffing their stats, but also damaging them for free, slowly but surely. It helps as another way of attacking enemies even before you actually unleash your offensive Psyker spells after generating enough Psy rating. Then we can finally pick Psyker Extremis for the ultimate Psy rating possible, at least from level up, because IDIRA of course can have 100 plus, not just a measly 4. Then more willpower, followed by more operative talents, because well, we have the space for them. First with Fresh Target for some minor damage against enemies at full HP. Then we can finally pick Warp Speed, a very nice buff that will increase one ally's or IDIRA's movement and agility by enormous amounts at this point based on Psy rating, talking about 100 plus. It's actually hilarious because you can increase an ally's movement by 100, so you literally move back and forth the whole map multiple times. Then back to Ballistic Skill increases, followed by Adrenaline Surge. It has minor synergy with our build because we have a talisman that already does this, but much better. Although you can kinda combine both. Now at this point you really already have the best Psyker talents, but something very fun you can pick for IDIRA is Blade of Light, which increases the damage of force weapons based on Psy rating, and well, having 100 plus damage is hilarious. so she can actually be the best, let's say, lightsaber wielder in the game. I'd rather use her for spells, however. It's just something you can do for fun. Just go for weak hearts so enemies suffer more damage, well, slightly more damage anyways, which is why I delayed for now, when blinded or stunned, and IDIRA has easy ways of proccing both. Then back to awareness, and I would just go for combat meditation now. Because of the way our IDIRA build works, once she finally attacks enemies, she'll have such high damage that you don't really need extermination or cataclysm. Although you will have space for all of them later on anyways. After that, pick comprehensive analysis for more exploits. This can even be picked during operative progression, as early as level 13, 14 or so. Then more awareness, and sharpshooter. After that, once again, either Lord Xenos or Medicae. Well, you kinda ran out of really good talents to pick by now. Might as well pick Visions of Doom for a very slight debuff. Then more ballistic skill, and back to perception. Plus Lord Xenos or Medicae. And at this point you might as well pick either Cataclysm or Extermination, but first Extermination. Eager for Battle also works for higher starting AP. Then Instant Exposure, because why not, you have the space for it. Followed by Advice and Guidance, also a minor buff because I don't believe it stacks at all. Then more Lord Xenos or Medicae. Then Hunting Surge, kind of a minor benefit, another reason I delayed for now. Followed by Unnatural Luck. I mean, it can prevent criticals on allies, but you know, with my builds, enemies aren't getting a single turn anyways, and early on we don't have the space for it. Followed by our last Psyker power, the highly useful Metabolic Overcharge. It comes late, but is quite OP for our IDIRA build. She can grant one ally an extra turn immediately with twice the number of their normal AP, and guess what? A number of action points equal to IDIRA's PSY rating, which is hilarious, because obviously they can have 100 plus AP. And in case you were wondering why I didn't pick Santic powers, well, I already have my main character as the Psyker God build for that, also my Officer Psyker Mercenary. But it is something you can consider picking earlier for IDIRA instead of Biomancy if you prefer. For me, Metabolic Overcharge. Then the last Perception Increase, and for the last Exemplar talent, might as well pick Eager for Battle, or, since you don't necessarily need the extra action points, or Perfection Under Fire for +5 to all stats. Kinda minor, but at this point, it doesn't matter. And whatever, as your last true talent. Let's go for Weak Body, Weak Soul. And that's it for our OP IDIRA Psy Goddess build. Now let us cover how to play with our IDIRA the Psyker Goddess, starting with Act 1, so the early game. On a normal turn, your IDIRA will have 4 action points, and ideally you always want to save 2 of them for your offensive abilities, which is most likely always going to be Lightning Arc from your starter Psyker staff, although you can find some better ones later that have the same ability with higher damage potential. Anyways, this is great because it can hit up to 4 enemies at once, and since our IDIRA has the second sight Psyker talent, she can hit from very far away while also being behind cover. Early on, you most likely want to hit the enemy that's at, let's say, the center of the pack, so you can hit all 4 at once. And ideally, the weaker enemies first, because they will most likely be one-shot by this. There's not much of a point in hitting enemies that are very close to IDIRA, because our Psychic Barrage talent will only increase damage by a very nice amount if the enemies are at least 6 cells away from you. Also be careful when you have nearby allies, including melee allies like Abelard, because they might end up becoming viable targets and hit by this as well, something you don't want. So you can always manipulate Chain Lightning so long as there's enough enemies as to not hit an ally. Anyways, let's start with these enemies here, because we can hit and one-shot 3 of them at once.
But of course, what an unfortunate turn of...
There we go, we actually do even higher damage than what it says here, because we'll have the very nice bonus from Tides of Excellence, our operative talent that increases damage by loads. And of course the best part is it will keep on increasing damage as you destroy enemies and trigger your exploits. And all enemies will always have exploit because of your Uncanny Sight talent, on every single turn. For your second offensive power, you have Psychic Shriek. This can deal higher damage than Chain Lightning, but only hits one target at once. So ideally, unless you have only a single enemy remaining or a tough boss, just go for Lightning Arc. Also, don't forget, unlike, let's say, Pyromancer abilities, both Lightning Arc and Psychic Shriek prevent you from moving afterwards, which is why we have Second Sight for higher range, as you stay behind cover all times. Now you also have a defensive and debuffing potential side with IDIRA. Ideally 4 warning on your main tank, let's say Abelard here, 4 bonuses to both parry and dodge. And as you might have noticed, we already triggered a Perils of the Warp with IDIRA, which is, let's say, part and parcel of playing with her as an unsanctioned Psyker, because she's kinda like a wild mage from Dungeons and Dragons. She'll always have a chance of generating Perils of the Warp, but they aren't that high. Anyways, early game, the effects aren't really that annoying unless you're summoning demons, but with my builds you can defeat them just fine. This is another reason it kinda helps to have IDIRA start not so close to other party members, because she can damage them with Perils of the Warp or even knock them down, annoying because you'll then lose a turn. But you know, when you have powerful builds, it doesn't matter, you can handle enemies just fine, even with IDIRA's wild magic side against you. Now, after using 4 warning, you don't have to use this on every turn, just on your tank unless you have the AP to spare. You can go for Sensory Deprivation to debuff one powerful enemy. It's just that in a battle like this, you have a lot of, let's say, weaker enemies. But since the rebel commander here is about to act and he has guns, so a ranged weapon, might as well debuff him to highly reduce his to-hit chance.
Anything else?
There we go, he failed the resistance test, so now has pretty much crippled weapon and ballistic skill, which means chances are he's gonna miss when attacking. Other than that, you can also cast Analyze Enemies for 1 AP to increase the exploits of one target and expose weakness to reduce their dodge, parry and armor. This is much better safe for bosses only, you don't need it on weaker enemies at all. Unless they have super high armor like, let's say, machines such as a turret. Now, because of how high IDIRA's damage and range can be even early, she can also benefit from extra turns, during which you only have 2 action points, perfect for more Lightning Arc spam. Look at how high her damage is now, around 30, instead of just 20, because she'll keep on getting more and more stacking bonuses to damage by virtue of triggering exploits and Tides of Excellence. So for example, we can actually kill around 3 targets here.
Be gone.
Even more, because she has the pain channeling ability to chain excess damage to a nearby enemy. And now she already has a +7 from Tide of Excellence just in the first turn of battle. When you add up Psychic Barrage and then her Analyze Enemies percentage bonus from exploits, as you can see, your IDIRA can be quite powerful even early. Now let us cover how to play with our IDIRA from the second chapter onwards, which of course is when the fun really starts. As by now you'll have some of the best gear for loads of extra Psi rating, her special Warp Conductor gloves, that increases Psi rating by +1 for every Psychic Phenomena or Perils of the Warp, even more momentum and temporary HP equal to IDIRA's Resolve, plus of course the highly OP Spirit Drape Talisman, that makes it so all her non-offensive psychic powers, both buffing and debuffing ones, will cost -1 less AP during the entire first round of combat. Anyways, once battle starts, if you're going with my builds, some characters will always act first, including Pascal, Cassia, and my Officer Psyker. Pascal can already start with Missionary Oath as usual, so IDIRA gets an extra turn.
Request approved.
But first let's just buff her with Cassia because we can with Reveal the Light, the best, most important buff for a Psyker ally for the huge bonus to willpower.
I am a navigator, not a servitor.
We can also already drop combat zones, most importantly backline.
Insist, Lord Captain. If I may.
So IDIRA gets the Fire at Will benefit from Pascal. Now it's IDIRA's first extra turn. Even with just but 1 AP from Missionary Oath, it doesn't matter because IDIRA can already start doing everything that matters. Because once again, thanks to the Spirit Drape Talisman, almost all of her buffs and debuffs will cost 0 AP, outside of Foreboding, which is still 1. Now the first thing you want to do, and this is why you should provide IDIRA with an extra turn to either Pascal or the Officer's Bring It Down ability, is start spreading prey around the enemies. Ideally, 2 preys on the weakest enemies, enemies that are easily one-shot by allies, like, let's see this prisoner here with 49 HP on Unfair. The last prey should go to a tough enemy that you won't one-shot, like the guard here.
But of course.
Now we want to get started with our buffing and debuffing. First, always start by Foreboding, because by virtue of being a major psychic power, it has much higher chances of triggering psychic phenomena, 20 plus 4 times psi rating percentage. For minor psychic power, so most of your other buffing and debuffs, it's 5 plus psi rating percentage. Do note that in both cases, it is actually very much tied to your psi rating. Great, because the more we are generating, the more psi rating we get from her Warp Conductor gloves. And of course, this in result will also directly increase the chances of minor and major psychic phenomena triggering. So it kinda loops back and forth itself, becoming just stronger and stronger and stronger as you increase your psi rating. But first, with Foreboding, we already got psychic phenomena, so she has 5 psi rating now with +1 from the gloves. Minor phenomena is usually just a flavor message like this, it doesn't really have any downsides whatsoever. But well, since all of our other powers cost 0 AP, we can just spam them. Such as First Prescience on IDIRA herself to increase her mental stats.
Anything else?
And because of how many buffs you'll have per turn, you can just buff one character one by one anyway. So first let's dump everything on IDIRA, but it doesn't have to be on her. You can also already go for, let's say, Forewarning on your tank, for her dodge, parry, and so on. But I'll be buffing her first. Then Iron Arm for strength and toughness.
Anything else?
And now we'll still retain the ability of using Sensory Deprivation, a very powerful debuff, which ideally goes into the toughest enemies. Let's go for the turrets here, who can be blinded amusingly enough.
On it.
We only got +1 psi rating from this all, mostly coming from Foreboding. Sometimes you'll get more, it depends, it's somewhat random, but the higher your psi rating, the higher the chances of you getting more and more. Anyways, the turret here has already been highly debuffed by IDIRA. Sadly, it actually made the test, despite a 10% chance only, but that's luck for you. Now we pass, and it is our Blaster Psyker God build as a Pyromancer. Because he is an offensive character, you can already get started defeating the enemies IDIRA marked as prey, the weaker ones of course. So let's go for this one here, who will definitely be one shot. And there we go, IDIRA immediately gets an extra turn because of the highly powerful Savor the Kill talent from Bounty Hunter. While she'll only have 2 action points in this turn, it doesn't matter because you can do everything you want. So Foreboding again,
Will do.
and just repeat. But now you can buff another character, let's go for Cassia. Prescience, Forewarning,
Anything else?
Iron Arm, and then debuff the second turret here, who is the toughest target, with our blind spell, Sensor Deprivation.
What?
Emperor,
Was
deliver
that
us.
you?
We actually got a Perils of the Warp here, which is even better, because IDIRA, just in the second extra turn, already has 8 psi rating. That is double the amount we started battle with. As I mentioned before, Perils of the Warp can be somewhat annoying, so it helps you have her start battle not as close to your allies. But then you kinda miss the Missionary Oath extra turn from Pascal. Anyways, your party will be so busted that it doesn't matter if you're getting Perils of the Warp. It's even more psi rating anyways. The best part is, even after casting all of your buffs and debuffs, you'll still have 1 AP remaining to cast Analyze enemies on the toughest target, so the turret here.
Anything else?
Because of course, the higher the amount of exploits it has, the more damage it will take once IDIRA finally attacks. Now it's back to our Blaster, Pyro God build. We are already at high momentum, by the way, because IDIRA will keep on generating momentum through Perils of the Warp and Psychic Phenomena. So let's activate Fervor for more debuffs later. Then it switches back to Pascal. We can attack because we are under backline. And we can actually kill the Poxwalker prisoner here, who is the second prey.
Running vital functions.
And it's back to IDIRA, another extra turn. And of course it's the same, just repeat everything we did before, and chances are you'll get even more Psi rating. We have less now because the Tamer of the Empyrean only works for 1 turn. Anyways, it's just the same, Foreboding.
On it.
Then you can buff a second ally. Let's go for our Psyker god
But
here.
of course. Was that you?
And still retain the ability to debuff yet another enemy. Let's go for the Poxwalker guard here, who is another prey. Pascal, of course, now has 1 extra AP by attacking with plasma weapons. And we can drop a joint analysis for even more damage party-wide. Now it's Cassia's turn as a grand strategist, and we are already at high momentum. While IDIRA has good enough Psi rating, 7. You might as well buff her even further if you want her to be your best damage dealer, since the guide is all about her. So let's go with Mend Reality.
Me? If you insist, Lord Captain.
You don't need to cast Reveal the Light again, but it will just increase in power as you get more buffs.
I am a navigator, not a servitor.
Anyways, you can already drop Finest Hour on IDIRA, or a big damage dealer. Most importantly, you can use Bring It Down on IDIRA, because here's the thing.
Isn't this a job for the serfs?
Unlike the extra turns from Bounty Hunter, under Bring It Down, your IDIRA can actually attack the enemy. And by the way, just look at how high the damage from her Psychic Assault is. Even despite the fact she only has 7 Psi rating, so the reality is you don't need to increase it to 50, 100 plus. It's not necessary, it's just fun that you get to do that. Anyway, something fun we can do is switch to your Sniper Rifle ranged weapon, as I'll cover in the gear section. It can be whatever rifle. Just so you can activate Wild Hunt on the tough enemy you marked as Spray. This is very important because when you get the first upgrade to Wild Hunt, so upgrade number 2 for +3 charges of Hunt Down the Prey, you just have to attack the enemy with it. That's why we have a ranged weapon as a backup, so you don't need to be close to them.
None will stand against me.
And well, the point is that you'll get more Hunt Down the Prey, while still keeping this enemy here as Prey. So now you get to spread Hunt Down the Prey to 3 more enemies, which of course means even more extra turns to IDIRA.
On it.
Let's pick this one here who's close to death as well.
But of course.
So your IDIRA can potentially have 6 entire extra turns, just from Bounty Hunter. But you know, it's the same logic as before, you can just repeat all of your buffs because they are still under 0 AP. So long as IDIRA doesn't get her first true turn in combat, the Spirit Drape Talisman will still be in effect. That's why extra turns are so helpful. So let's buff our Officer Psyker here, for example.
Was that you? Or...
Notice that this time we didn't get any Psi rating increase. It can happen because earlier, well, it's kinda luck-based. But once again, the higher your Psi rating, the higher the chances of triggering Psychic Phenomena or Perils of the Warp. The thing is, even if we didn't get a single Psi rating increase, look at how many buffs we already spread through all of our allies, plus of course debuffs on multiple enemies. Also, remember the Warp Mind's power we picked with IDIRA earlier, because of how many spells we already cast? All the enemy stats have already been debuffed by -15, and it only gets higher and higher. So even if you didn't get a Psi rating increase because of bad RNG, it doesn't matter, your IDIRA is still useful during these extra turns. Now it's our Officer Psyker's turn, and we'll be at high momentum again. We didn't even buff IDIRA yet with stuff like Voice of Command and Air of Authority.
I will not be deterred.
But anyways, let's cast Bring It Down on our biggest damage dealer, who is my main character as the Pyro God.
And so shall it be done.
You can go for Ignite on another enemy marked as Spray. Back to IDIRA, and you know it's the same logic, it will just keep on repeating. So just do the same again while buffing your party members by enormous amounts, more and
But
more.
of course.
Once it switches back to whatever character killed the enemy for IDIRA as spray, you kinda refresh your cooldowns for some abilities. For example, let's activate Run and Gun and Revel in Slaughter. And kill another enemy marked as spray. This time the first tough one here, who is almost dead. More IDIRA. And now she's at 9 PSY rating.
Was that you? Or anything else? On it. But of course.
And after that, 10 PSY rating, so just increase higher and higher and higher. And like I said, the cooldowns kinda refresh, which is why we can already cast Run and Gun again. Plus Ignite, of course. So honestly, you can just keep on going again and again and again. While your IDIRA only gets stronger, while the enemies get more debuffed, and your allies even better buffed. Because now Warp Minds is already at -20. You can even return to buffing IDIRA afterwards.
On it.
Plus, of course, cooldowns have reset, so you can attack again with the main character. And this back to IDIRA is hilarious, but still works just fine, even after some release nerfs. Anyways, once you run out of AP with your big damage dealer, it doesn't matter because it switches back to your officer, who can cast Finest Hour on either IDIRA or another damage dealer. Anyways, at this point is when you drop your offensive Psyker abilities, which by now are hitting for what, 700 plus. And this is Act 2 only. So let's do that. There we go. Don't forget, enemies like turrets can't take mental damage because they're true machines, which means stuff like Psychic Shriek or Psychic Assault won't work. But that's why you have staff abilities like, let's say, Siphon Life from a Biomancer staff, which will do, you know, close to 1000 damage, so still great. Notice the difference in damage from the second turret, because the first turret is the one that has the highest amount of exploits we've been stacking since the beginning of battle. Actually, you can even use Analyze Enemies first, because it's also 0 AP because of Finest Hour. But yeah, it's toast. Let's see, 1008 damage, plus 400% just from exploits, and 16 flat damage from Tide of Excellence. Plus all party members have enormous dodge from IDIRA's buffing abilities. Not to mention bonuses to all stats. Now let's cover gear for our IDIRA PSY Goddess build first with Act 1 options. IDIRA actually is not that reliant on gear early. And well, it's going to depend on if you want her to be your best damage dealer, in which case you'll save a few slots for her, otherwise not so much. But be sure to go with a staff that has the Arc Lightning ability. She already starts with 1 to hit multiple enemies, followed by a sniper rifle when you want to hit enemies with your operative heroic action to debuff them just in case. When it comes to Cloak, as much as I would love to use the Emergency Injector because it can automatically revive IDIRA, I don't think it's gonna help with your Perils of the Warp. Because the way it works nowadays is the most dangerous Peril of the Warp effect is the one that automatically one-shots IDIRA, so she dies for the battle. Sadly, you cannot use auto-revive items to bypass it, as far as I've tested, either through the Emergency Injector or the Peculiar Trinket, because when using them, you actually get hit twice, so you do revive, but you get hit again by the Wild Magic effect. So sadly, there's not much you can do, I believe. At the very least, it's a very rare type of effect. For armor, any light armor that doesn't interfere with dodge, such as the Carapace chestplate. For helmet, you can go with Warp Seer goggles if you want more lore warp, or if you want her to be the best damage dealer, the classic Face of the Sovereign for higher resolve on enemy kills. For Talisman, just Denial of Nightmares, but you can leave that for another character if you want. Now let's cover second chapter plus options. The big upgrade here is, of course, first, IDIRA's Warp Conductor gloves. It comes from her personal quest during Act 2 and, well, increases her PSY rating by +1 for every psychic phenomena or perils of the warp. Amazing, of course. While other characters can equip this, they can only become unsanctioned psykers very late in the game. IDIRA already starts the game as 1, so it's mostly unique to her. Besides that, the Spirit Drape Talisman should make all non-offensive Psyker powers, including buffs and debuffs, cost -1 AP for the first entire round of combat. This comes from Colony Management, and I'll soon post an updated Colony Management guide. Besides that, for helmets, I like the Tamer of the Empyrean to increase Psi rating even further. It's nowhere near as good as the Warp Conductor gloves, however, because it's only for the next turn and doesn't really last for the whole battle. Something else that can be very good for IDIRA is the Grimoire of the Void. I usually have it on Cassia, because it increases her main source of damage, warp damage, by loads of flat damage, but the ability of triggering psychic phenomena more often, with a plus 15% chance, can really help IDIRA get started on increasing her psi rating by enormous amounts, through Warp Conductor. For boots, we absolutely want Psyker's Footwear, which increases your dodge by 3% whenever you use a psych power, and well, it stacks with itself, considering how many buffs and debuffs and Psyker stuff you are casting per extra turn. You will get loads and loads of extra dodge from it, so your IDIRA will become quite tanky after you're done with it all. Oh, and I almost forgot, but for helmets, you can also go with the Cultist Hood, which lets you either restore action points or take 10 warp damage whenever casting psychic powers. Thing is, I don't think it interacts quite well with Grimoire of the Void. Plus, IDIRA doesn't really need all the extra AP, but something fun you can do with it, let's say assume you don't have Spirit Rape, is combine it with Cassia's Manned Reality Navigator power, because it will add a lot of extra damage deflection against warp damage. So IDIRA will most likely be able to fully avoid the extra damage she might suffer from Cultist Hood whenever it doesn't proc the best effect. For armor, I just have the Headhunter Light Carapace for extra dodge based on your awareness. But it doesn't really matter for IDIRA since she'll have so much from Psyker's Footwear anyways. Meanwhile, for staffs, I have the Staff of Blood here, mostly for the Siphon Life ability, which works as an alternative way of dealing damage for enemies immune to mental damage, and has nice enough willpower and toughness upgrades as a buff. But you can go with whatever, including better upgrades for the Arc Lightning staff you start with. Besides that, a rifle, very important so you can actually attack the enemies, with your Wild Hunt ability as a ranged attack, to get more prey charges. Talismans can be whatever. I have Invigorating Resolve here, but you might as well save it for someone else, assuming you don't want IDIRA to start close to allies. It's just that she constantly, well, generates momentum due to Warp Conductor for the secondary effect. So in a way, you're also adding more hit points for all allies. Now let's cover Act 4 plus options for gear with IDIRA. The main upgrade, of course, is the Psyker's Breastplate. I suppose you could potentially get this during Act 3, but it kinda requires high faction reputation. It stacks with your Warp Gloves for the same effect, +1, Psi rating, well, +2 actually, for every psychic phenomena or perils of the Warp. It does actually reduce the chances of triggering psychic phenomena, but it doesn't matter, cause you'll have more than enough by virtue of higher chances, based on Psi rating anyways, which will always increase from all the extra turns and spells you can cast. Besides that, for talismans, you can go for Star Mist Scarf, which increases your Psi rating. It helps a bit to get started anyways, since once again the higher base Psi rating, the easier it is to proc more psychic phenomena and keep the chain going and going. For staffs, there is a pretty big upgrade here, which is the Thought Guide staff. I've already covered it in my Officer Psyker build, but well, allies affected by your psychic powers, including IDIRA herself, will get loads of resolve for each spell cast, and since you have so many in your extra turns, all party members will end up with enormous resolve amounts. One of the most important stats in the game, of course, because it is tied to your heroic action spammage, without even needing to be buffed by an officer ally. For the rifles, once again you can go with whatever. I just have the Stupor here. When I almost forgot, but during Act 3 you can also get the Prey Scanner accessory, which is great because it inflicts prey automatically at the start of battle on one enemy. And the more prey, the more extra turns you're getting with IDIRA. Well, alright friends, so this was it for our IDIRA, the Ultimate Psyker Goddess build. If you found this guide useful as always, please remember to like, subscribe, and also consider becoming a channel member if you can. I really appreciate your support. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.